20-year-old Jessica married a wealthy 78-year-old man. What happened on their first night left all their relatives in absolute shock. An unheard-of story. My grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, was a living legend in our small but wealthy corner of Connecticut. At 78, he was the kind of man they don't make anymore. He'd built a construction empire from nothing but grit and a $500 loan from a friend back in the 60s. His hands, though now spotted with age, had a strength in them that told stories of foundations laid and skyscrapers raised. But in the last few years, that strength seemed to wane. He moved a little slower, his powerful voice became a little softer, and he spent more time looking out the vast windows of his estate than he did in the boardroom. My family, his children and other grandchildren, saw this as the inevitable twilight. They spoke of him with a kind of pitying affection, as if he were already a cherished memory. They'd whisper about protecting his legacy and making sure he was comfortable. Then came Jessica. She was 20. I first saw her at one of Grandpa Arthur's Sunday dinners, a tradition he insisted on. She was a student at a local community college, working part-time as a waitress at the diner he frequented for his morning coffee. She was beautiful, but not in the loud, flashy way you might expect. She was like a porcelain doll, big, quiet eyes, a shy smile, and a way of moving that was almost apologetic, as if she didn't want to take up too much space. My aunts and uncles exchanged looks over their wine glasses. My cousin Mark snickered under his breath. Looks like Grandpa's finally cashing in his retirement for a new model. It was cruel, but it was what everyone was thinking. The age gap wasn't just a gap, it was a canyon. 58 years. It felt wrong, unnatural. Their courtship was a blur. 1 month she was the quiet girl at the diner. The next, she was a constant presence at his side, her small hand often resting on his arm as he walked. He seemed revitalized. There was a new light in his eyes, a quicker step. He'd laugh, a full-throated boom that we hadn't heard in years. My family saw it not as a renaissance, but as a final, foolish flicker before the flame went out. "She's got him wrapped around her little finger," my Aunt Carol would say, her voice tight with disapproval. "He's not in his right mind." When they announced their engagement, the family held an emergency meeting without him. It was held in my Uncle Robert's ostentatious living room, a space so filled with gold trim and velvet, it felt like a parody of wealth. The consensus was clear. Jessica was a gold digger, a predator, and they had to do something. They talked about legal options, about questioning my grandfather's mental competence. I stayed quiet. I loved my grandfather, and seeing him happy was nice. But I couldn't shake the unease. A 20-year-old girl marrying a man nearly 80? What did they talk about? What did they have in common besides his 9-figure bank account? The wedding was a surreal affair. It was held on the sprawling back lawn of the Pendleton estate, overlooking the Long Island Sound. The scent of 1,000 white roses hung heavy in the humid August air. Jessica was stunning in a simple, elegant dress. She looked less like a bride and more like a girl playing dress-up, her expression a mixture of nervousness and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Determination, maybe? Grandpa Arthur, in his tailored tuxedo, looked frail but incredibly serene. He held her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The family put on their best fake smiles, offered stiff congratulations, and then retreated into small, whispering clusters. "Did you see the ring? It must be 10 carats, one cousin hissed. "This whole thing is a disgrace," another muttered. I just watched them, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The whole event felt like a performance, a play where everyone knew their lines except me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, Arthur and Jessica bid their guests good night. They were retiring to the main house for the evening, their first night as husband and wife. As the heavy oak door of the mansion clicked shut behind them, a strange quiet fell over the remaining family. It was the quiet of predators waiting. The party was supposed to wind down, but no one left. The string quartet packed up their instruments, and the catering staff cleared away the champagne flutes, but the family lingered under the massive white tent on the lawn. Night fell completely, and the garden lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow on their anxious faces. The whispers that had been subtle before now grew into a low, constant buzz of speculation and strategy. "How long do you think it'll take before she starts isolating him?" Uncle Robert asked, swirling the dark liquid in his glass. He was the self-appointed patriarch now, a man whose ambition had always been bigger than his talent. "We need to act fast, power of attorney, before she convinces him to sign everything over to her." I pulled out my phone, a nervous habit. I sent a text to my grandfather's number. "Beautiful wedding, Grandpa. Hope you have a wonderful evening." I stared at the screen. The message was delivered. But there was no reply. That was odd. Grandpa Arthur, for all his age, was a stickler for etiquette. He always replied, even if it was just a simple thank you. I tried to brush it off. It was his wedding night after all. He was probably occupied. But the thought felt hollow. An hour passed, then another. It was almost 11 p.m. The air grew thick with a collective, unspoken anxiety. I walked away from the group, toward the edge of the property where the manicured lawn met the dark, churning water of the Sound. The smell of salt and money hung in the air. I remembered a strange moment from a few weeks prior. I had stopped by the house unannounced to drop off a book for Arthur. As I entered the library, I saw Jessica at his massive desk. She wasn't looking at photos or reading a novel. She had a stack of what looked like bank statements spread out in front of her, and her finger was tracing a line of figures. The look on her face wasn't greedy. It was one of intense, almost academic concentration. The moment she saw me, she flinched and swept the papers into a folder, her shy, nervous demeanor returning instantly. "Oh, Leo, I was just organizing for Arthur. He gets so many papers." At the time, I accepted the explanation. Now, standing by the dark water, the memory felt sinister. What was she really looking at? I tried calling his phone, straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Arthur Pendleton. Please leave a message." The voice was strong, recorded years ago. It was a jarring contrast to the frail man I'd seen at the altar. I tried the landline to the main house. The phone rang, echoing in my ear, 10, 11, 12 times. No one picked up. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. This was wrong. My grandfather had staff, a housekeeper, a night nurse who had been with him for years. Where were they? "She got rid of Maria last week," Aunt Carol said, suddenly appearing beside me. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "And Mr. Henderson. Fired them both." Maria was the nurse. Henderson was Arthur's personal assistant of 30 years. She said Arthur wanted to simplify his life, that she would be his caregiver now. The knot in my stomach tightened into a painful fist. This was a classic isolation tactic. Cut off the old man from his trusted support system, make him completely dependent. It was happening even faster than they had predicted. The family was now gathered in a tight circle, their voices sharp and urgent. "He's not answering his phone," Robert announced, his tone dripping with a grim sort of vindication. "She's probably already had him sign something. Or maybe his health has taken a turn." The excitement of the day, he left the sentence hanging, the implication clear and ugly. He was suggesting the stress of the wedding, or the wedding night itself, might have been too much for a 78-year-old heart. My own heart hammered against my ribs. What if he was right? What if my grandfather was in there, hurt or worse, and this girl was just letting it happen? "I have a key," Robert said, his eyes scanning the faces of the group. "For emergencies. I think this qualifies." There was a murmur of agreement. The decision was made. They were going in to check on him. Their concern felt oily, tainted with self-interest, but my own fear was genuine and overwhelming. I had to know he was okay. I followed them as they moved like a pack across the lawn, their expensive shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass. The mansion loomed before us, dark and silent except for a single light burning in a second-floor window, the window to my grandfather's study. The silence on the walk to the front door was deafening. All I could hear was the crunch of our feet on the gravel path and the frantic thumping of my own pulse in my ears. The air was cool now, and the scent of the roses seemed cloying, funereal. Uncle Robert fumbled with the keys for a moment before finding the right one. The sound of the lock turning felt like a gunshot in the stillness. He pushed the heavy oak door open, and we stepped into the cavernous two-story foyer. It was pitch black. A marble chill emanated from the floor, seeping through the soles of my shoes. "Grandpa?" Robert called out, his voice a loud, false-sounding boom that was swallowed by the darkness. Only silence answered. A faint line of light was visible under the door to the grand staircase, coming from the study upstairs. As a group, we began to climb. The plush runner on the stairs muffled our footsteps, making our ascent feel ghostly, clandestine. I felt like a trespasser in my own grandfather's home. Every creak of the old house made me jump. We reached the second-floor landing and tiptoed down the long hall, a gallery of Pendleton ancestors watching us with stern, painted eyes. The light from the study grew brighter. As we drew closer, we could hear voices. Not the sounds of a struggle or a medical emergency, or even the romantic whispers one might expect on a wedding night. It was the low, calm murmur of business. My uncle, emboldened, didn't bother to knock. He gripped the brass handle and shoved the door open. The four of us, me, Robert, Aunt Carol, and my cousin Mark, spilled into the doorway, our faces a mixture of fear and righteous anger. And then we froze. The scene before us was so utterly contrary to every scenario we had imagined that my brain simply refused to process it for a second. The room was not a honeymoon suite. It was a war room. My grandfather, Arthur, was not lying frail in his bed. He was seated at his massive mahogany desk, wearing his suit trousers and a crisp white shirt, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked more alert and alive than I had seen him in a decade, and beside him, in a chair pulled up close, was Jessica. Her wedding dress was gone, replaced by simple black slacks and a blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was leaning over a laptop, her finger pointing at a complex spreadsheet glowing on the screen. "Right there," she was saying, her voice clear and confident. "The transfers started small, 18 months ago. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, routed through 3 separate shell corporations, but the frequency increased in the last 6 months." Standing behind them were 2 men in dark suits whom I instantly recognized as my grandfather's top corporate lawyers. The room was an organized chaos of documents. Bank statements, property deeds, and thick legal files were spread across the desk and even stacked on the floor. My grandfather looked up, his gaze sweeping over our shocked faces. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep, profound disappointment. "Robert," he said, his voice as hard and solid as the granite he used to build his empire, "I was wondering how long it would take you to trespass in my home." Uncle Robert's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked from Arthur to Jessica to the lawyers, his face turning a blotchy red. We were worried," he finally stammered. "We thought." Arthur held up a hand, silencing him. "You thought I was a doddering old fool. You thought this brilliant young woman was a common thief. The irony is, you were half right. There was a thief in this family, several in fact." He gestured to a towering stack of papers. "Jessica is not a waitress. She's at the top of her class in forensic accounting at NYU. I hired her 6 months ago to find out where my money was going. The wedding, this whole romance, was the perfect way to get her inside, to give her the access she needed without raising your suspicions." Jessica closed the laptop with a quiet, definitive snap. She looked directly at Uncle Robert, her shy girl facade completely gone, replaced by a gaze of cold, hard steel. "And we found it all," she said. "Every last stolen dollar." The lawyers stepped forward. One of them, a man named Mr. Davies, held out a thick file folder to my uncle. "Robert Pendleton," he said, his voice void of any emotion. "This is a formal notice of civil action to recover approximately $2.7 million in misappropriated funds, siphoned from Mr. Pendleton's personal and corporate accounts over the last 2 years. It also names you, Carol Jennings, and Mark Pendleton as co-conspirators. Aunt Carol made a small, gasping sound, as if she'd been punched. Mark just stared, his face ashen. Robert snatched the folder, his hands trembling. "This is insane," he sputtered. "He's been manipulated. She put these ideas in his head." My grandfather let out a short, bitter laugh. "Manipulated? I saw the discrepancies in my quarterly reports a year ago, Robert. I just couldn't prove who it was. I pretended to be weaker, more confused than I was. I watched you all, with your fake concern and your greedy eyes. You thought you were vultures circling a dying animal, but the animal wasn't dead yet." The lawyers calmly escorted my stunned, sputtering, and suddenly very pale family members out of the study and then out of the house. I heard shouting erupt from the lawn below, a cacophony of denial and rage. I remained in the doorway, my feet rooted to the floor, my world turned completely upside down. Arthur's stern expression softened when his eyes landed on me. "Leo, stay." Jessica turned to me then, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than professional resolve in her eyes. It looked like empathy. "Your name wasn't in the files, Leo," she said softly. "The accounts he traced back to you showed nothing but the birthday checks he's sent you every year." Then she added the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. "Your Uncle Robert. 20 years ago, my family had a small construction business in Bridgeport. He initiated a partnership on a major development, then used a series of legal loopholes to bankrupt my father and buy out his assets for pennies on the dollar. We lost everything." My head swam. This wasn't just a job for her, it was vengeance. Personal, righteous, and perfectly executed. I sat in one of the leather armchairs opposite my grandfather's desk, the room now quiet except for the hum of the laptop. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I felt like I hadn't slept in a year. "You knew," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You knew Robert did that to her family?" Arthur nodded slowly, his fingers steepled under his chin. "I found out during my initial investigation into her background. It's why I chose her. I knew she'd have the motivation to see this through to the end." He looked at me, his eyes clear and sharp. "Your transactions were clean, Leo. You never asked for anything. You just came to dinner and talked to an old man about your architecture projects. That's why you weren't part of it." The relief that washed over me was so immense, it felt like a physical weight being lifted. But it was followed by a wave of shame for an alliance I was born into. "So, the marriage, it's a sham?" I asked, looking between him and Jessica, who was now quietly organizing the files on the desk. Arthur smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "We signed a contract, Leo, a business arrangement with a very specific goal. But along the way, I found a partner. Someone who sees me, not my bank account. Someone with a mind as sharp as my own used to be." He glanced at Jessica with an expression of pure, unadulterated admiration. "We have a deep respect for one another. What that becomes now that the job is done? Well, we have time to figure that out. It's a better foundation than most marriages, wouldn't you say?" I couldn't argue with that. I left the mansion an hour later, stepping out into the bright, cool morning. The catering tent was gone. The scattered rose petals on the lawn were the only evidence of the grand deception that had taken place. I walked past my car and down to the edge of the water. I had spent my whole life thinking I knew my family. I saw a frail old man, a greedy young woman, and a concerned group of relatives. But every single one of my assumptions had been wrong. The gold digger was a brilliant agent of justice, the doting family were a pack of thieves, and the frail old man was the shrewdest strategist of them all, a king who had feigned weakness to trap the jackals in his own court. I realized that the most shocking lies aren't the ones people tell you, they're the ones you tell yourself, because they are easier to believe.